Trekking On by Denise Reitz. Yeah, this was a great month for nonfiction. Legitimately a great month for nonfiction. So this is kind of the sequel to Denise Reitz's Commando. Commando was his journal of his time in the Anglo-Boer War, the 3 years in the Anglo-Boer War. As a youth, he was 17 when it started, and those 3 years. This takes up after that. Now I've spoken about this a little bit in my review. This one's called Trekking On in the Company of Brave Men. The original name was Trekking On, a Boer journal of the First World War. But the reason this was changed is because the original 2 chapters of this book was taken out because they wanted to focus a bit more on the war here. They put 2 chapters from the book that follows up on this one, that gives a bit of the Reitz family history, and put it in here. And it's sad because those 2 chapters talks about, it's the interim time between kind of like the First World War and the Anglo-Boer War and the First World War, and what he was doing that. He had like adventures in Madagascar and stuff. I kind of wanted to know about that. I'm disappointed I didn't get that, but it's fine. It's fine. It's okay. It's okay. I'll survive. I will survive. I'll probably find it at some point somewhere else. But then, so this was mostly to focus on events around the world, World War One, and what Denise's experiences. And I love, as much as I love Commando, and Commando is by far the more well-known book, because, and I think the reason for that is that Commando is one of the few journals about the Anglo-Boer War, whereas the First World War has endless journals. And this is not the most unique version of it. So this book never got to the heights of Commando, but it's just as well. It's actually better written. I think he's already shown it's a better writer in here, and the events and stuff are even more fascinating for me than Anglo. I did prefer this over Commando, and I love Commando. I mean, Commando I kind of read 3 times in a strange way. Well, I listened to it on audiobook once. I listened to an audio series that had a lot of that book in it, and then I read the book as well. So that's how much I enjoyed Commando. I read it as a prelude to this. I really think this is better. What is so fascinating is about how strange the South African story in the First World War was, and how Denise saw it all. First, we're doing with the rebellion that happened in South Africa for the people that didn't want to go to the war. The 1914 rebellion, and trying to overthrow and throw off the British yoke. But then how the government was able to stop it. That's the first part. Very interesting. And that's kind of a fun, silly part. Like, there's a lot of hijinks in that story. Yeah, because you're kind of dealing with your neighbors. And yeah, there is tragedy, there is sad. But it's also very like, we don't really want to fight. We're actually neighbors. We don't really want to fight. We're actually friends and neighbors. We're just on opposite sides of this thing. Which it almost feels like a farcical tragedy at times. And there's tragedy in this. Don't forget me. The rebellion has a lot of tragedy. But then it kind of feels silly and goofy at times because you realize they don't really want to fight that much, and everybody's kind of no. Yeah. Then it moves to the campaign that took place in Namibia. Then it was called German Southwest Africa, which is a fascinating. German South of Namibia. It's desert, a lot of it. It's dry. And it's a rather quick campaign in general, but there is kind of a hectic element of this. The amount of times that Denise is like without water and going, and like the first is too great stuff, and just by chance, by luck, they find a place where the troops that are fleeing for them destroys the waters and the wells just to make it harder for them. But then they found like one thing that still has water. I mean, interesting, fascinating. Then it moves to the East Africa campaign, which is heavy jungle, malaria, fever, and bushfighting, which is like crazy. I love that part. That part was like so interesting, fascinating, and enjoy. And how they trying to beat the Germans there, but ultimately the best they can do is push the Germans out of the area. But also how the animals suffering there, the amount of horses dying from the horse fevers and stuff. The amount of men falling ill, and like the sicknesses were way worse than the fighting by far in that area, in East Africa. Then the Nice, obviously, is the guy that cannot get enough. So he decides to go to Europe after the East African campaign is winding down, and goes to the to the Western Front, to the trench warfare. Now, an interesting thing, the Nates is one of those guys, like, he hasn't really gotten injured in the wars he's been in. He's gotten sick. He once broke his leg on a rock, but it was an accident. It was nothing really to do with the war, in the Anglo-Boer War. He was also one of those, he was the guy that survived while everybody around him dies, and he kind of remembers it. It's like, yeah. First, in the trenches, twice he gets so injured that he's out for months. And the ways it happens is insane. The trench warfare, it's such a hectic, crazy, and it's so amplified, and really does, like, everything that, like, in all the other campaigns he had to go through seems so small compared to just the insanity of the First World War and the trench warfare. And when he talks about how people slowly start going mad there, and the brutality and the amount of people just getting mowed down, and the artillery and the incendiaries just destroying everybody. The amount of times he talks about a shell just landing on somebody and they're gone and they evaporated, and you had to see that happen. It is a harrowing part, and it's also, but then obviously there's always like weird tidbits and funny stuff that even happens there, and how weird the human spirit really is. It is a stunning book, and the Nates rates this book should be way more famous than it is. I really enjoyed it, and he's writing just for quickly explaining what is going on, making you feel without going over too much detail into it or languishing on something too long, and just all the weird little things that he came across and saw and everything, and just how the cities were just evaporated, destroyed, how fields, hills were just destroyed, and the thing was something like, and how it would change. And if you enjoy South African, and you're curious about the First World War, there's no book that does it better than this that I've read so far. I do now possess. So one of Jan Smits's First World War, by David Brocker. I'm excited to read that version. But this is for, like, if you want the front line point of view, nobody does it better than the Nates rates. It really, and a journal from somebody that was there. Really great. Really amazing. And it's just easy and fun to read. And often, like, whenever there's something weird it goes into it, or something funny that happens, and even in the worst situations, there's always a funny thing that happens. That's kind of a weird thing about war. Even in the serious, most harrowing things, there will always be some silly story that everybody remembers.